Um, anyway, it's a pleasure to be here. And I was telling Ravi, I just had lunch with a group of you. I've been coming to Yale now for a number of years, and it is very refreshing and very important. I saw the most globally diverse group of people that I have ever seen in this institution. And I will have to say, and I was telling the dean, that the innovation that the Yale Business School is driving by the creation of the MAM program is remarkable. It's not only remarkable, it's critically important. And it is something that as business leader of this world, we're looking into, because you guys are actually engaging in the type of environment that our world is today. The talk that I'm about to give you is about a world that through technology is becoming both more global and more local at the same time. More global and more local. Anybody that has access to technology, and technology is becoming a democratic commodity, can build a global business today. Our ability to interact with associates, with customers, with consumers around the world is not an academic exercise in analytics, is a person-to-person engagement process that you all are going to need to become very capable at. So when I come here and I face and I look at all these beautiful faces from different places of the world, different skin tones, you probably have all sorts of different accents. That's what the world is like. That's what my world is like. And I would like to think that because of it, it will become a better world, a much more engaging world, a much more fun world. I was surprised, to tell you the truth, Ravi, when I was talking to the dean, and I said, you know, as we were embarking in this sort of experiment, it's been a bit controversial, because, you know, there's a group of people that think that everybody should have the same level of academic standard because this is the Yale brand. I'm going to tell you one thing, and my role in life is to be provocative. With all due respect to all of you, the level of academic achievement will represent a very infimous part of your ability to succeed in life. Your ability to engage with each other, your ability to work in teams, your ability to learn, your ability to improvise, your ability to synthesize, your ability to actually make truth out of few pieces of information is what's going to make you successful. Your ability to be resilient is what's going to make you successful. So embrace what you have, the opportunity to work with people from all over the world, whether they're at the same or not the same academic achievement level. You're going to learn more of that interaction, believe me, than of some of the classes with Nobel-winning professors that you have here. And let me tell you why I'm saying this. First, technology. I can do it without slides too. It's okay. At the end of the day, I've devoted 30 years of my life to be a global marketer. What that means to me is very simple. I've been able to have the ability to build businesses, brands, and people, structures all over the world. And I've been 30 years at it. I wish I could do it for 30 more years. It's the most meaningful area that I've ever encountered, and I rejected it for the first 10 years of my life. Why? Because it blends creativity with business analysis, with the ability to understand people, customers, and anticipate those particular needs. At the highest level, I would like to believe that I exist, that my marketing team exists to create environments where people working together can achieve extraordinary things while finding meaning and well-being. I started by saying that it's important to have this sort of global engagement and global interaction. And I mentioned that the world was becoming both global and local at the same time. When you're where I sit, you're looking at competitors like American Express, competitors like MasterCard, competitors also like Google or Amazon or Apple that are global. You're also serving clients that are global. Yet at the same time, both competitors and clients are expecting global scale, but also your ability to deliver against very specific global needs and local needs and local actions. And then you have your consumers, you people, that through technology can click to see what's happening in Myanmar or in the Arab world or in Brazil, and at the same time be able to engage with each other to meet for a beer in a local pub. That's your world. That's the world of consumers. We go from global to local within a single click. When you looked at our business, each and every one of the dimensions will follow the same global and local approach. E-commerce, by definition, is borderless commerce. Yet, every consumer around the world will enter through a local portal. So the ability to provide meaningfully locally relevant experiences, and at the same time the consistency of a global brand, because different consumers are going to be approaching from different parts of the world, very important. Affluent, a very important part of our business, particularly in credit. They are the global citizens of the world. They're going to expect consistent experiences no matter where they are in the world, yet at the same time, in their local markets, they're going to expect access to those things that are locally relevant to them. Cross-border, by definition, international, again, approach from a country-to-country standpoint. And money transfer, which is the ability to transfer money from one country into the other. Yet, there are aspects of our business that are profoundly local and will forever be local. Debit, prepaid. Our objectives with debit cards or debit businesses around the world is to move people from cash into the electronic payment of the world. That's local. The only way that we are able to educate consumers into the benefits of electronic payments versus cash is in locally relevant ways. So our marketers have to be thinking in both terms at the same time. What happened 5 years ago, and it's interesting that I'm telling you a story that happened 5 years ago because we're right at the beginning with a change of CEO, with a changing business model. Again, so in a way, I'm thankful to Ravi to give me the opportunity to tell you what we did 5 years ago, because I'm going to have to remind myself of it because we're about to do it again. The mandate was we were going to be a global company. Visa, believe it or not, until 5 years ago was an association owned by the banks that we serviced. So we provided the integrated solutions from a processing standpoint to clients that owned us. So there was no P&L, we were not publicly traded, so on and so forth. The moment that we became publicly traded, the mandate was to begin to establish the platform for a global company that could capture those opportunities, the global and the local opportunities. And one of the first things that the new CEO did together with the board was we need to bring the first ever global CMO for the Visa business. And I was lucky to be selected for this particular role. So first step, as we were approaching this new company that needed to create a global platform that was able to capture both the global scale as well as the local opportunity. First step was organization. When we began, we had 5 different areas of the world with 5 different divisional presidents and their own local CMOs. What that meant was that there was no integration of the Visa brand anywhere in the world. So if you were a consumer going from Canada, from Vancouver to San Francisco to Mexico City, just to keep it in the west, you would have three very, by the way, those are our two most profitable corridors in the world for cross-border business. You were going to receive three fundamentally different brand experiences. The only thing consistent was our logo. Our logo in the store to show acceptance and the logo in the cards at that particular time. But the overall experience, product platform, your benefits as an affluent, so on and so forth, completely different. So how do we create a different approach to capture both global and local opportunities? The first thing that we did was to dismantle the regional structures and to integrate them into a global structure. In other words, from now on, the CMO, myself, was going to have straight line responsibility over the different areas of the world. So for the first time, the marketing people in Latin America were not reporting to the president of Latin America, who was reporting to a board of advisors with the banks that own us in Latin America, banks like Itaú, Bancomer, so on and so forth. They were reporting, the head of marketing in Latin America was reporting directly to me, and I was reporting to the CEO, who reported to one integrated board of director concept. It was dramatic, to tell you the truth, because each one of these presidents and each one of these CMOs had total absolute control of their budgets and of the brand experience. They were only responsible to the board of to the different boards of the regions around the world. One of the first things that we needed to do, said, okay.
Just organizationally, did a lot of the same people, did they move under you, or was there a large reshuffling in terms of, I'm just wondering if people wanted to stay then under you and how that transitioned.
So good question. My approach was I was going to play with the deck of cards that I was given. So my intention was that everybody was going to stay, understanding that the new principles that we're going to talk about right now were principles, and those that would not play by those rules, they were welcome to leave. At the end of the initial part of the process, we lost only one person. Over time, over the last 5 years, pretty much with the, actually no, two have been with us since the beginning with me, and we have 3 new people in the team. So actually a good, I would say it's a good blend. So interestingly enough, everybody came together. Said the first thing that we're going to do is we need to clarify the roles. Who's going to be doing what to whom, right? And we decided that there were 2 very big initiative-driven roles and 1 big supporting role. And that was the biggest cultural shift. First, global and local. First, the local market was going to drive results, drive the local P&L, and the marketing team's role was to establish the local relevance of our products. They will create all those debit communication platforms, all those prepaid communication platforms, all those affluent communication platforms. The global, 1 strategy, 1 positioning statement, 1 brand architecture. We were going to drive scale, in other words, the acquisition of big platforms like the Olympics, like FIFA, and we were going to be able to share best practices and tools. So strategy and scale, all the implementation, all the applications, all the work at the local level. So the question that you may have, what's the percentage? Today I will tell you that 90% of the work is developed locally, 10% of the work is developed globally. That 10% usually have to do with global platforms like the Olympics or FIFA. We'll show that in a minute. The region. What was the role of the region? These were the center of the universe. Now, they had a supporting role, a very important but supporting role. Their number one role was to support the local markets in driving the locally driven agenda. So completely shifted the power. Number two, they were also going to be able to capture regional opportunities. Easier done in Latin America, where you have language synergies. Easier done in the Middle East, where you have cultural and language synergies. Very difficult to do in places like Asia, where you have China and India and Thailand and Indonesia. And importantly, these people at the region became part of the global team. That was the big trade-off. Okay, so you're not the key decision maker here, but I am going to elevate you to the global team so that those strategic scale and best practices and tools are going to be developed jointly by this global team. And the commitment was, as we undertake this journey, you're going to be part of that decision-making process. You're going to be engaging with us, and we're going to get to those, we're going to make those decisions as a team. One thing though, and it was very important to have that level of clarity. If there was a tie, my vote was going to be the decision-making vote. And everybody's very clear on that. But at the end of the day, the way to bring them around was participation and ownership within a framework. The framework of the strategy and the framework of the decision-making process. So with the structure in place, the next step was strategic alignment. And here we came to the task, the job of defining what our brand strategy was going to be all over the world. For that, a very small group of people got together, just like I'm doing right now on the evolution, and we went and analyzed everything we needed to know about our brand. And to make a very long story short, the key conclusions of all the data that we had available was very simple. The rational platforms of what Visa is, has been, and forever will be, were consistent. This brand was built by a founder who had the vision of one day linking mainframe computers with money and creating a new currency for life. A universal currency that you could use no matter where you were in the world, and it will work. That was his vision 50 years ago. The rational platforms for that had always been convenience, particularly versus cash, acceptance, no matter where you are in the world, security, ensuring that your information and your money is protected, and value, ensuring that there was a meaningful value propositions to all the elements of our value chain. On the emotional side was always about empowerment, empowering the consumer to do what they want to do within the context of their money. And it was very interesting because at that point in time, through a lot of discussions and interactions and fights, bringing people from other departments, the technology people, the product people, that's the product truth, that's the brand truth. Again, what changes is the manifestations of it. So convenience is reestablished every second in this technology-driven world. In the past, convenience was not having to call to check your number and your signature. Now is getting approval in less than a second and a half, which is what you get today. Security, the dimensions of security when we started was people stealing those carbon copies. Today is identity theft. Acceptance, when we were starting, it was about acceptance in the physical world, taking it to more places around the world. so that people could use their card. Today is acceptance in the digital world, in the card not present world, bringing it through phones to the point of sale. And value continues to be a fundamental principle of our business. So after a lot of argument and discussion, we agree on that. The vision was very simple. Those were not my words. Those were the words of the founder. So people had a choice. Do they agree on the words of the founder? If they didn't, well, it wasn't the new guy in town. It was actually the founder. The same holds true for the emotion. So at the core, because our mission in life is the electronification of commerce, is everything that Visa do will try to convey that it is a better option than it's better money for a better living. A better option versus cash in most of our emerging markets in the world, a better option versus our competitors in some of our more sophisticated elements, markets in the world.
Just one question on
Sure.
this dimensions. One is that obviously on the recent side it very globally, I assume it very globally, how well you did on those security and convenience in different countries. So now that you're doing global, did you feel comfortable putting that as sort of the commonalities, if you like, that on which Visa will stand? And the second was just the balance between the reason and emotions. I'd like to get a sense from you, like how much, how much resources or stuff would be behind the reasoning part versus the emotional part. How are you guys thinking about that?
Okay, so on the rational pillars, there was a base that came out of the countries in which we were doing 85% of our business that gave us the credibility in those dimensions. In those new markets in which we were going to be operating, it became the obligation. This is what we need to demonstrate. So it was a combination of both what we are, importantly what we wanted to be. And by the way, now that we're moving into the mobile world, I still have the burden of the obligation of demonstrating those abilities. And that burden is not only from a communication standpoint, that burden is also from a product standpoint, right? In terms of reason and emotion, I mean, there's a reason why we designed this as 3 pillars. When we started the journey at Visa at the regional level, there was either rational, product-driven communication or emotional. We decided at the time that there had to be a very interesting balance, and just because you're demonstrating product features does not mean that you cannot also connote an emotional connection, or vice versa. So the way that we have structured this, going back to that 85% number, 85% of the time around the world, people are getting Visa messages through their products. There's still an emotional connection out of it. It's part of the brief. Then there is, and you will see, hopefully this year the technology will work. You will see that in product-driven, in the product-driven marketing, in 2 cases for debit, one from Brazil and one for India. But then there is the times where every 4 years we celebrate the human spirit with the Olympics, and that's 100% emotional. Now we have data for 5 years to be able to actually demonstrate that model actually works in terms of increasing overall equity on a country by country basis. So that was done, and then we also figured out as a team that, just like many of you, everybody came from a different culture. Everybody had a different way of referring to marketing terminologies. Everybody had different methodologies of how to do business assessment. We needed to create unified language to define our culture, to define the Visa way of marketing. And there were 3 pillars to that, to our way. The first is the lighthouse, which I just discussed. The second was the marketing strategic framework, which is every company would have their own version of defining their market, the source of business, the path to transaction, which is what we do, the objectives, positionings, as well as the key metrics and KPIs. This was very important because in a new world where there was more centralization, our marketers around the world needed to understand that their work was still very important because this is done on a market-by-market basis. So the target will be different on a market-by-market basis. The business opportunity would be different. The source of business, whether it is cash or is a different competitor. Importantly, this was our way of telling the local marketer that his job was really, really, really important. It was important from a strategy standpoint. It was important from an output standpoint. But we sort of defined the spaces for their creativity, defined their spaces for their impact, which is really important. Because at the end of the day, if I want to bring people like yourselves into my business, you need to know that you're going to have the opportunity to actually make a big impact. Rather than have it that loosely defined, we created the space and the process for that. Then we had, as we were, the third tier of our process is what we call audience first, which is the realization that the media dynamic of the world has become so complex and so important in terms of engagement that it is as important to understand behaviors in terms of actions, transactions, and purchase, the traditional attitude, so on and so forth that you guys learned, but also within the context of media behaviors. What is the path to transaction? How do consumers around the world are consuming media? The different targets that we mentioned are consuming media across their path to transaction so that we can actually engage with them in a meaningful way. What was important about this, number one, that it came from a McKinsey study called the CDJ, or Consumer Decision Journey, that you guys should research if you haven't, because it's a great piece of work. And number two, that this has to be done first. That's why it's audience first. This has to precede creative development. Because by creatives understanding the media path to transactions, it actually guides the idea into a very different sort of place. It actually puts digital media, it actually puts social media in the right bucket. It's not a layer, it becomes an integral part of the communication process. We developed this with that leadership team, with those regional vice presidents as well. And not only that, but they had to become the spokespeople, the masters of the tools, so they themselves then were able to assume a leadership position with their teams around the world, teaching the new Visa way of marketing. Interestingly enough, the biggest hurdle with all this was not the marketing organization, although every now and then you have to shoot a terrorist, as they say. But it's actually was actually some of the regional presidents, those people that had complete control of their businesses until the company became public. And that alignment process I had to do personally, one-on-one, in their own turf. And we took them through the science, going back to where I started. We took them through the analysis. We took them through why the pillars were the pillars. I mean, our argument was so logically perfect. I mean, any person from Yale or McKinsey would have endorsed this piece. At the end of the day, when I was talking about this, it had nothing to do with what the regional presidents were feeling. What they were feeling was that I was pretty much stripping away all their power when it came to the brand. And it took me about an hour of conversation to actually figure out that I just couldn't understand why would they be objecting to such a regional, perfectly developed argument. Because I was being insensitive to their emotional needs, because I was not positioning it within the cultural context that I had to do it. I learned in an hour, after an hour and a half of scolding, if you will, in different languages. At the end of the day, what brought them in was two things. A carrot and a stick, to be frank. Number one, my personal commitment to them that I was going to take them through the entire journey, and that I was not going to do anything until they saw it first, and that they were going to have spaces for them to dissent. In other words, the obligation to dissent, if you will. That was the carrot. The stick was, and it had to be said as well. And I said, all this is great, you count with me, but at the same time, there's going to be one vote, and that's no longer going to be me, it's going to be the CEO. There's going to be one brand. And they got it. And they got it. So that combination between you're going to be involved, but at the same time, there's going to be one deciding vote, and that deciding vote, it's, by the way, not even mine anymore. Now it's the CEO was really a very important element in the process. Then at the end, we also had to agree on how we were going to measure our success. 3 things. Transactions, that's the role of marketing. So in a way, the way the Visa business works is Visa sells the platforms to banks. That's how the share is defined. That's how the share is defined. It's a 10-year contract, 60% of the portfolio. The revenue is defined by the transactions, the number of times that a consumer is using our number or our card. That's the role of marketing. So I'm not fighting for share at the bank level, I'm fighting for usage at the consumer level. If you're an affluent consumer in Japan, you're also fighting for share of wallet against American Express, but that's a country by country type of decision. At the top, we drive the transactions. So we're going to measure transactions. We were going to measure on a regular basis with same level of suppliers our brand equity, and we were going to establish one measurement for marketing ROI, and we were going to use one supplier, which was Accenture, to ensure that we would actually be able to provide the benchmarks of returns by different types of markets: sophisticated, emerging, developing, so on and so forth. Then that translated into an advertising idea. Before that advertising idea could be developed, we had to integrate all the advertising and media and digital agencies of the world to ensure the consistency of that brand promise, at least from the get-go. That also, to tell you the truth, gave the marketing organizations a lot of brownie points because we deliver significant synergies by consolidating agencies, by communication agencies, digital agencies, and media agencies around the world. We were able to deliver $200 million in savings on the first 2 years alone. That in itself was a significant selling point even to the board of directors for why to do all this, in addition to all the other benefits that we've spoken about. That's why I mention it last, as opposed to first. There was a benefit on synergies in doing all this the way that we did it. The next piece was executional excellence. The way to convince our system that this was going to be global and local was as we were going through our agency evaluation process, and we did a pitch, and that pitch was incumbents only, so that every region in the world can have their agency represented, not for the region anymore, but actually to get the total global business. Probably one of the smartest political decisions I made, because that meant everybody would have a chance. Non-incumbents, maybe that was my trade-off. Non-incumbents were not allowed. But the brief was very simple. You had to demonstrate how the new brand promise, whatever it is that you're going to develop for us, based on our positioning statement, demonstrate itself across multiple product lines, but importantly, in terms of very specific countries as diverse as Brazil, Canada, Korea, Russia, and the United States. So that the proof point was not going to be this global one execution that the world was going to receive, but rather me and the regional vice presidents were going to see a presentation that says, this is the brand idea, this is how it works for debit in the United States, this is going to work, and it was going to be a different execution developed by a different agency within that network for that particular market. So that was a very important proof point to show to the system that this was not about developing globally 3 spots or 3 digital campaigns or 3 social platforms that need to be used consistently around the world. You just translate and ciao. That was a very important element in the alignment because it was a way to showcase what this global and local world was going to look like. And then about the work. And what I want to, hopefully, this will work.
Yeah.
How do I do it? I want to show you 2 spots. One spot from Brazil. Both are against cash. The one in Brazil is about the benefits of using debit in your day-to-day purchases. And it's a Brazilian spot as it uses humor. The one in India is using payments, electronic payments, Visa, for internet purchases in the rural areas of India, which is a significant area of opportunity. And you're going to see 2 spots that deliver the benefits of electronic payments. That's what we do. We're the leader of the category. That's what we sell, the benefits of electronic payments, and allow our competitors to ride the wave. And that's fine. But in 2 very different ways.
Sem problema, presente. É que é meu aniversário de casamento.
Posso te falar uma coisa?
Pode.
Pagar com Visa é bem melhor.
Às vezes é bom ter um amigo para avisar. Pagar com Visa é mais prático, moderno e seguro. Mais pessoas ao redor do mundo vão com Visa.
So yeah, trying to buy an ironing equipment for your wife on your anniversary is not a very smart decision, and I've never done it. So now India, completely different approach. Again, it's emotion in a very different sort of way. Brazil, locally relevant humor. Now you're going to see the India spot.
As evening turned to dusk, the children rushed back home. The neighborhood fell silent. The silent darkness became the destiny of our neighborhood. But the power to change our destiny is in our hands, my brother told me. He was young, but so much wiser. He showed me how to use my Visa debit card on the internet.
Safe away.
It's safe, he said. It gave me access to my money and to things far away. My Visa debit card gave more power to my feet and to my dream. With this power, I built a cycle generator to bring light and cheer to my neighborhood. It brought the sound of playing back to our land.
Visa did it. Dream to advance.
I mean, completely different approaches, both incredibly successful. I mean, the brand recalls of both campaigns in each one of the markets are through the roof. Again, it's the power of having an integrated strategy, but allowing the local markets to drive in ways that are completely locally relevant. The other side of it is the Olympic work. There we have it's more of a global approach, but done in very in extreme locally relevant ways. The way that Visa works with this, and we've mastered this now through the years, is we bring representatives from the key local markets that are going to leverage the Olympic platform. Together, they agree on what their needs are, what products they're going to be featuring, what is their level of engagement and commitment in terms of budget, what is their audience first plan, in other words, how much digital work they're going to require, how much social work they're going to require, what is the role of TV or billboards or what have you. Out of that, a work plan is developed and then it is centrally produced, but using athletes and local cues that those particular local markets have developed ahead of time. And importantly, from an agency standpoint, it is a global team of people that are there not only at the development stages, but also at the production stages to ensure that what consumers are seeing in Russia is going to be relevant for the Russian consumers as well as the United States. So for example, a spot in the United States will feature Michael Phelps, and Yelena, the pole vaulter for Russia, will be one of the athletes featured. That same spot in Russia will be all about Yelena, and Michael Phelps will just swim a lap or two. And the same holds true for Japan or China or Korea or Brazil.
Antonio,
So,
one quick question. So you mentioned synergies and savings of 200 million. It sounds to me that there's a, and you know, your local, the more you standardize the local and make it more standardized across regions, obviously the savings will increase. Whereas you were still developing some local content in its executions, even though they are to a consistent brand strategy. So I'm just wondering, is there a tendency for the organization sometimes to get greedy and say, let's standardize because we know we'll save instead of 200 million, we'll save 300 million. And yeah, there are all these other benefits, but this 300 million is going to be in the bank. And do you have to fight that? Or in other words, how much you...
I start with the premise that local relevance rules. Local relevance does not necessarily mean locally developed all the time. And we've demonstrated that even in the US. After you agree that you're going to connect at the local level, then what is the most efficient way of developing your resources so that you can do it better? I mean, for example, that's debit. That's debit and very strong local cues because money is local, right? As we begin to develop platforms in e-commerce, for example, there's the need of significantly more global coordination. Again, business needs rule as opposed to synergies. And the way that we were doing it was more of a reaction to a structure than the right way of doing it. So let me show you the Olympic work.
In 2008 and 2010, Visa cheered on the world. In 2012, we got the whole world cheering along with us. We created a campaign that was truly global, empowering fans to fuel athlete performance like never before. We asked people everywhere to join the global cheer, and they did, showing their support with inspirational messages, photos, and videos, with tweets, and posts, and likes, and by watching and sharing our content. All actions that we called cheers. And we got over 60 million of them. With more than 70 countries and nearly 1,000 financial institutions and merchant partners activating the campaign, a massive on-the-ground presence in London, fans traveling to the event from foreign countries spent over $1.9 billion on their Visa cards during the 3 weeks of the Games. We produced over 80 commercials in 18 languages, each telling the kind of story the Go world is famous for. We told stories that crossed borders and boundaries. We told stories of triumph, stories of overcoming the odds, stories that celebrated the athletes and people around the world cheering for them, and real-time stories that celebrated events as they happened. And some of the real cheers of real fans we collected online. People everywhere were amazed and inspired, and they helped make this not just the most social and global Olympic campaign ever, but the most successful Go World ever. Visa showed a significant increase in key brand metrics, saw the largest gain in online conversation, and got approximately 50 million views on YouTube. Inspired by more than 1,500 stories and articles around the world, generating over 206 million impressions. Visa was the leader among top sponsors in marketing leadership message pull throughout the Games And most importantly, Go World made people want to use Visa more. And not just at the games, but everywhere. Seeing a 13% increase in claimed pass month usage around the world. All reaffirm that the Olympics partnership drives Visa's business and the business of its clients. Visa, a proud sponsor of the Olympic Games for 25 years, asked the world to cheer. And the response was deafening.
So that's how you bring it all together. And it's done every 4 years the summer, which is it has about 90% participation of our system. Every 4 years also the winter that has a significantly smaller group of countries for obvious reasons. And we do the same approach for the World Cup. The interesting thing about this is that the process, as hard as it has been and continues to be, because again the business of business is the business of people, managing people, aligning people, and bringing them together to deliver the type of objectives that we need. It has worked across all the dimensions that we have in our business. What's interesting about the process is that we did this 5 years ago. We just had a change of administration. We have a new CEO in place. We have a business that is changing its dimensions from card present to the card not present world, where mobile, e-commerce, and even information services are platforms that we're going to be leveraging. A world where governments around the world are more interested in the payment industry. So we're sort of rebuilding our Visa Inc. positioning and creating a very specific role for the consumer brand, the government brand, the employee brand, the customer brand into an integrated sort of way. So in a way, we're sort of beginning that journey again with a broader scope to ensure that as we move into the next 10 years, that we have a more cohesive and differentiated way to connect with our multiple stakeholders, whether they're governments, employees, or consumers around the world. And that's my story. Thank you.
Okay, questions from the class?
Yes, you were just talking about repositioning Visa Inc. kind of to address the next 10 years, specifically thinking about kind of the move into digital and specifically mobile. How are you kind of repositioning out of being just seen as a card network and into really kind of an electronic payments system?
Again, first it starts at the top. What is Visa Inc., right? And what is Visa Inc. across the multiple dimensions of our constituents? And that's work that we've never done, and that's work that we are doing. We're doing right now. There are some very important elements of consistency in everything that we do. Universality across all our stakeholders. Growth among all of our stakeholders. Innovation among all of our stakeholders. And there's also a very important element of financial inclusion that we have been developing over many years, and we have never been vocal about it. All those elements will become a more integrated part of our Visa Inc. story. And then in that architecture, which of those elements each one of our brands, the government brand, employee brand, client brand, and consumer brand, are going to leverage and undertake. So that's sort of what we're doing, and hopefully by early next year you're going to begin to see some of the manifestations of what that means. But it's critically important. So.
You talked early on about the transition you made 5 years ago with Visa and the structural changes, and I was wondering actually two things. The first is that decision initially, was that driven by the cost-benefit analysis that you talked about as far as saving $200 million worth of synergies, or was it for consistency of brand? And then secondly, as you went through the selling process, what were some of the key lessons you learned, and what might you do different this second time around to help engage managers earlier on in the process?
The businesses was the first. I mean, the order of what I gave, it's what is our business, in what way is our business developing? And there were, forget about the $200 million that was gravy. There was lost business opportunities in not having the regions interact better with each other when you had those dramatic changes on consumers, e-commerce, affluent, cross-border, so on and so forth. So that was at the top. Number two, the company did know at the time that we were going to have to accelerate our ability to enter into new businesses. Therefore, the need for an umbrella brand to actually leverage the introduction of whether it is a country or whether it is a platform. So that was at the core of what this needed to be. The synergies, actually there was no synergies identified. The synergies we were able to actually present as additional benefits. So that was one. Things that I would do different. Again, it's a different historical moment. You gotta. I'm a history major, and I've never forgot you got to put things in historical context. I was new to the organization. I am not new now. I'm 5 years into my tenure. I do not have to be as patient as I was because I have the credibility of the organization. I was building mine at the time. So things like I am going to only include the incumbent agencies just for the sake of alignment. I will not have to do, not that I'm going to do that, but the amount of time and effort dedicated to bringing people in that I knew up front that were not going to be part of the journey, I don't think I will do. I will do again. That's having said that, taking the time to bring everybody in, I'm doing it, and it's a critical component. Even though I have a strong relationship with all these people, ensuring that the roles and accountabilities are maintained and are clear, absolutely. The one thing that I will add to it, I will add a significantly deeper social media component to everything that we do that we didn't have at the time. We call it social at the core, which means everything that we do will need to be irresistibly shareable. So whether it is a point of sale poster or a lollipop in an event or a piece of communication, you want consumers to share it. But importantly, in addition to that, ensuring that every single marketing plan around the world has a social media component and make that mandatory early on. Those are the things that, in fact, those are the things that we're doing. And we had to ask ourselves what you asked. What will we do different than we did then? Jeff?
Seems like one of the things that I heard a couple minutes ago was that looking forward, you want to bring in government as a stakeholder and customer to some sense in the marketing process. Can you talk a little bit about what's driving that change?
So we have two yin yang on this. Number one, after the economic meltdown, the global economic meltdown, there was a return to nationalism around the world. The sources of all evils is the fact that we're completely interconnected, the markets are interconnected, the electronic payment is interconnected, all that. And there's been a tendency to protect. Again, we're in the business of money and information. That's national tender. Right? So we've seen a significant reaction post-recession of governments around the world, including the U.S., to regulate things related to money. Whether that was banking, in our particular case, was payments. the fees that people pay at the point of sale. So remember, Visa is being public only 5 years. Government engagement was something that the company didn't do before. The banks did that on behalf of Visa. So now, significantly bigger engagement to clarify what we do and who we are, to try to avoid that level of legislation going forward. What's interesting about this is that the government has this, we need to control on one side, but then there's also, we need to optimize in the other side. So depending on who you're talking in the government, most of the states' economies today want to bring, instead of paying social services via checks, they would rather pay it via prepaid card. It's significantly more efficient. It makes a lot more, I mean, it saves a lot of money for the states, money that they could be devoting to other things. Plus, anyway, so because we have that relationship with the government, we want to bring the two of them together into a cohesive story. We believe in financial inclusion. We are for the electronification of payment. We have data from around the world that shows how economies, communities, and people grow because of it. And if we have an issue with cost, let's deal with that as an issue of cost, not as an issue of purpose, which is what we want to do. That approach, what I just told you, it's what we're building because we haven't had to engage at this level before. So just like your question, it's the business that's driving the solution and not the other way around. Yes?
To follow up on that, it's the business that's driving the solution, but it's the leader that's really implementing the change. And I was doing a little Googling before we came to class, and there was this great quote that you had in one of your blog posts about, you commented how leaders need to identify that what we stand for, there's a line in the sand that you create and you don't cross. And I was curious to know what sort of lines in the sand were you drawing as a new leader coming to Visa, trying to implement this big change for the organization and then effectively save money for the organization. What kind of things were you able to do and convey to this new audience?
So on the brand side, that there was going to be one brand, and I was going to be, that was my line. That was my line in the sand. We were not, and we were not going to play with it. We were not going to do the quintessential. By the way, you know, I've done all these tricks myself. I've been small country director, big country director. I've been regional director. I know how these games are played. So this, yeah, we'll have your strategy, but we'll do our own thing. That was my line. On the leadership side, that we were going to create a very open and transparent dialogue. This is tough. This is tough. If we're going to begin to posture and begin to play games with each other, this would never have happened. And that was my line in the sand. That bad behavior meaning you're not speaking up when you're supposed to speak up, or you're creating noise where you shouldn't be creating noise, or you're not treating people right. Those were lines in the sense that for the first time we were applying on a global basis, and we did have to take action on many of these cases. So when I used and it was a bad joke about the shooting the terrorists, people that are not going to play by the new strategy and by the new values should not be part of the team. It's that simple. Those were my two lines. Zach?
So you spoke about before at lunch that there have been times where you've had to just sort of brush yourself off after, maybe a setback, failure, whatever it may have been, and move on. Can you talk about maybe pre-Visa something that you either brought into Visa or that just really, left a strong lesson in your head that, either a setback or a failure that really stuck with you and determined how you did things in the future?
Yeah. When I joined PepsiCo, I spent 13 years at PepsiCo. I had been working at Kraft for a long time. PepsiCo comes in, At the time, I thought that I wanted to be a general manager. So you're going to change your mind several times. That's another story, another beer. PepsiCo brought me the opportunity. You could be a general manager of a key country in Latin America, which is what I wanted to do at the time, sooner. So I joined. The company underwent a major meltdown within the first 6 months that I joined. It was probably at the time what I thought was one of the worst careers mistake I've ever made. It cost billions of dollars in revenue to the company and to the shareholders, and we had to pretty much in my division alone fire 54% of the workforce. And I learned many things at that moment that I never forgot. Number one, success is not an aspiration, but it's really an obligation. When you're not successful, a lot of people are going to pay the price. Whether it is the shareholders that gave you money trusting you and you didn't live up to that obligation, or whether it is the people that you're going to have to fire. I remember coming in or going in from Miami, where I was living at the time, to Argentina, coming back to the immigration office, and the typical question: business or pleasure? Business. Who do you work for? I said PepsiCo at the time, and the guy told me, "Whatever happened to your stock?" And I'm going like, he said part of our retirement fund was invested in PepsiCo. We're suffering for it. I was one of those moments that you go like, when people are talking about shareholders and they have this image of, guys smoking cigars and eating steaks in New York City. It's real people with real money that are trusting that with you, and you have an obligation to respond. And importantly, the people that are working with you, you don't do your job, you may lose your job, but more importantly, the people that are working for you are going to lose their jobs. That to me was a lesson that I was about 30 at the time, and I never forgot that. So as I was getting into Visa, one of the reasons why I joined was this was a very interesting opportunity. I was going to be the first global CMO. So if I am successful, it will matter. If I'm a failure, it will matter, and it will be remembered as well. So that sort of challenge is what brought me in. That sort of obligation that I learned, 15 years before, I never forgot, and it still drives me to this day. Natasha?
I'm Abby, sorry.
It's okay. Yes.
I was wondering, so you mentioned in your presentation that you said innovation 90% is at the local level and 10% is driven at the global level?
No, not innovation.
Not innovation. Okay.
Communications.
Communications. Okay. What about what would you say that so my question is around innovation. What would you say the innovation breakdown is, and how the stuff that is created locally? How much transference do you see, or how do you pick up on the stuff that should be transferred and that will have relevancy in other markets? Sort of, I guess, strategic alignment from an innovation standpoint.
Okay, so here, two separate streams of work. We're a technology company. Technology requires scale, so you cannot have processing centers in each one of the countries, or you will not have interoperability. Okay, so when it comes to technological platforms like Google or Facebook, or a bit more centrally controlled. Right? When it comes to marketing platforms, I will tell you that 75% will be locally driven. Locally driven. And what we do at the global level is capture those learnings so that we can share and duplicate them. Peter?
Last week we heard from Arun about some of the challenges that today's CMOs are facing, particularly around sort of becoming a catch-all bucket in companies and sort of increasingly new stakeholders emerge that weren't there traditionally. And as a result, sort of the shelf life for your average CMO seems to be, I think it's 18 months or 24 months or something like that. And I wonder how, obviously you've been at Visa for 5 years, how you sort of navigated, if you've seen those trends, and second, how you've navigated them if you have seen them.
Yes, I've seen those trends. And when you talk about the addition of stakeholders and going back to the question about governments and all that, we just integrated at Visa corporate communications into marketing to be able to deliver that integrated communication platform and the very specific messages per each one of the stakeholders, and then begin to apply all this discipline into the governments, the customers, and actually the employees. What I would tell you about the CMOs and the reason why the ones that last and the ones that don't turn, I mean, Stephen Quinn from Walmart, he's been there even longer than I have, is that I am a businessman that happens to have marketing as a skill. So I am approaching things always from a business standpoint and backtracking to marketing as opposed to the other way around. And that's really, it seems like obvious, but not all CMOs are out there are that. They sort of narrowly define what they do and position themselves in a box. In my particular case, and I can give you example after example after example, is the same. It's not me. It's the same model. You're a business person first. You need to intuitively understand the business and then being able to bridge what is it that marketing can do to actually drive that business forward. It is easier in a consumer goods company because marketing tends to drive the agenda. It is harder to do in a technology company or on a service industry. But that's one. Number two, you have to spend a lot of time educating and aligning your business associates. Key relationships. The CFO. Very, 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 very strong relationship. You know, the successful CMOs will tell you they have a very strong relationship of trust with the CFO. And sometimes when you're dealing with soft stuff, are we really measuring equity or not? And you have the CFO actually fighting for your initiative, you know that you're doing your well right. The other one is with the head of technology or the R&D group. And the third is with sales. So that's sort of my triangle of influence. CEO a given, obviously, but CFO, head of technology, sales. Very strong, even personal relationships to ensure that you build that trust. That when the numbers get challenging, that you can still use that trust to actually push some agendas that need to be pushed forward. Understanding that if they don't work, then the trust goes back.
Great. Time for just one last question.
Sam?
I kind of wanted to build on that. I want to get your perspective on the role of Visa as a brand in a market that's pretty saturated. And I ask that because I have a view that may be too strong that sort of the networks are viewed as a commodity, right? Like when I don't pick a card because it's a Visa, I pick a card because it's the United card. So you've got sort of 2 to maybe even 3 brands that play a role in your relationship with the customer. So sort of just what do you see your job as in the United States? I get it in cash, in a market where you're trying to convince people to move from cash and the importance of brand. But it seems less relevant here. And sort of how do you deal with that challenge, especially as you move into other platforms?
So take that example that you use. United, Chase, Visa. So we have plenty of research that they will tell you, a consumer will tell you, the way that this works is United because it's about my miles, it Visa because it's acceptance, and the bill is going to come from Chase. That's literally the. So what my role is to drive transactions. So when you go to the airports and you see those big gigantic United cards with the Visa there in silver, that's co-op marketing that I'm driving to ensure that United continues to drive the business using Visa. That's on that particular example. Where we're dedicating most of our dollars now is ensuring that our brand health scores are, as they are, high. As we begin to launch new platforms, whether they're B2B, like information services, the utilization of data to actually drive transactions from a customer standpoint, or digital wallets or digital wallet platforms, that is a point of difference. And I would tell you that the reason why people like Google want to talk to us to ensure that the Visa card is within their wallet, new uses, new places, is because of the power of the brand. And that's not me. That's them talking. So that's what we're doing. That's what we're doing there. What's interesting about when you're dealing with, someone asked me just this week, one of our employees said, what was our most challenging market? And I said, each market is very challenging in very different ways. How do you measure fighting against the government in China because China UnionPay will not allow domestic transactions, only international transactions for the international brands, versus a highly competitive market like the United States that it's moving into the card not present world, versus a market like India and Brazil, where it is about educating consumers on cash, and the habits of cash are so inherently ingrained in behavior. So that's why, going back to the theme of the presentation, that is why it's so important that our people, you guys, are training global views and local relevance. Otherwise, you're not going to be very, very effective.
Thank you so
anyway,
much.
Thanks.